The marble floors shook beneath her heels as Vivian Blackwood burst into the nursery midnight, her heart hammering. But what she saw froze her blood. A stranger, broad rough, completely unknown, sat in a rocking chair, her baby in his arms. 7 months of endless crying, sleepless nights, and not once had little Emma rested like this. Now against this man's chest, she was silent, peaceful. Vivian's throat locked. Who was he? How did he get in? And why did her daughter cling to him as if she had known him forever? This is the story of billionaire single mom finds single dad feeding her baby. What happened next was unexpected. Stay with me to the very end and tell me the city you're watching from, so I'll know how far this story travels. The marble floors of the Seattle penthouse gleamed under the faint glow of recessed lights, but tonight they echoed with the sharp, furious click of Vivian Blackwood's heels. Midnight had folded over the city outside the skyline, drowned in mist and the low hum of traffic below. Inside, silence should have reigned, but it was broken by something impossible. In the nursery at the end of the hall, a man she had never seen before was sitting in her rocking chair. Broad-shouldered, dressed in a gray sweater frayed at the cuffs, his weathered hands were impossibly steady as they held her 7-month-old daughter. Emma, who had spent her short life crying herself hoarse at night, lay nestled against his chest, quiet, content, her tiny fists gripping his thumb as if it had always been hers to hold. Vivian froze in the doorway. For a moment, her lungs locked. She had built her life on control of her company, of her schedule, of her household. Nothing happened here without her knowledge. Yet here was a stranger, humming softly to her child, and somehow Emma was more peaceful than she had been in months. Her designer purse slipped from her hand, thudding against the Persian rug. "Who are you?" Her voice cracked like glass, trembling with panic and rage. The man didn't startle. He didn't rush to explain or stand to defend himself. His eyes, deep-shadowed, carrying a quiet exhaustion, lifted to meet hers. He spoke with a voice so low and calm it almost didn't match the scene. "Daniel Hayes," he said. "The agency sent me." Vivian's pulse spiked. Agency. No agency had been called. Her throat tightened. What agency? I didn't call anyone. No one touches her but me. No one. Daniel adjusted Emma gently, never breaking the rhythm of the rocking chair. Your housekeeper called. Around 10. Said you'd been up 3 nights straight. Said Emma wouldn't stop crying. She was worried. The name hit Vivian like a blow. Margaret. Loyal for 15 years, the woman knew her rules, her absolute rules about Emma's care. No one touches her. And yet here was a man with steady hands and a voice like worn velvet defying all of it. She had no right, Vivian hissed, stepping into the room. Her arms reached out, trembling with fury. Give her to me, now! For the first time, Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't move to obey. Instead, his thumb brushed across Emma's cheek with practiced tenderness. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe when I walked in. I wasn't going to stand in the hallway and listen to that. Vivian stopped cold. His tone wasn't polished like her staff's. It wasn't deferential. It carried something raw, almost familiar. And beneath the words lay a conviction she didn't know how to fight. Emma stirred, then let out a sigh, soft, trusting at peace. Vivian's chest ached. She had hired the best nannies money could buy. Not one had managed this. She wouldn't eat for me tonight. Vivian heard herself admit, the confession pulled from her like thread from a frayed seam. That's because you were nervous. Daniel's voice stayed low even. Babies feel everything. Your stress, your exhaustion, your fear. Sometimes they just need someone calm enough to tell them they're safe. Safe. The word stung. Vivian couldn't remember the last time she had felt it herself. Not since Richard's death. Not since the debts. Not since the boardroom battles that left her staggering home each night to face Emma's cries alone. Her spine stiffened. What makes you think you know what she needs? Daniel's eyes lingered on Emma, then flicked to Vivian, holding hers with unsettling steadiness. Because I've been exactly where you are, alone in the middle of the night. No one to call. Just a baby who won't stop crying, and the knowledge that if you fail them, your heart will shatter. The words hung in the air heavier than the silence that followed. Vivian's lips parted, but no sound came. For a flicker of a moment, the roles inverted. She wasn't the billionaire CEO dictating terms from marble boardrooms. She was just a mother trembling at the edge of exhaustion, staring at a man who carried the same scars she tried so hard to hide. Emma's eyelids fluttered closed again, settling deeper against Daniel's chest. Vivian felt something twist inside her, a pang of jealousy, a wave of relief, and a dawning recognition she didn't want to name. "You can put her down now," Vivian said finally, softer but sharp. "Not yet." Daniel shook his head. "Lay her down too soon, she'll startle awake. She needs to feel secure first." The precision of his knowledge startled her. This wasn't textbook advice. This was survival wisdom earned in sleepless nights she suddenly realized he must have lived through. "You talk like you've done this 1,000 times. His gaze softened, drifting back to Emma. "Once was enough to change everything about who I thought I was." Something in the way he said it clipped, guarded, but carved out of old pain made Vivian pause. For the first time since storming into the nursery, she stopped reaching for Emma. "What's your story?" she asked, the words sharper than she intended, but driven by something she couldn't hold back. Daniel's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Nothing worth telling, just a single dad trying to make ends meet. Lost my son's mother when he was 3 months old. Learned quick there's no clocking out when you're the only one they've got." The image struck Vivian harder than she expected. She had grown up surrounded by staff assistants, security people paid to anticipate her every need. The thought of being truly alone with an infant, no lifelines, no escape. It was a weight she could hardly imagine. Her throat burned. She turned away, clutching the nursery doorframe like it might keep her upright. "Why this kind of work?" she asked quietly. Daniel's shrug was humble, almost resigned. "Because I've been through nights where I thought I wouldn't make it, where my son's crying nearly broke me. If I can help someone else avoid that just for one night, it's worth it." The honesty disarmed her. His presence should have felt like an intrusion. Instead, it felt like something she hadn't realized she needed a reprieve. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the faint hum of the city outside and the soft rhythm of Emma's breathing filled the room. And in that fragile silence, Vivian Blackwood woman, who had never allowed anyone to see her falter, felt the first crack in the armor she had built around herself. The nursery light glowed soft amber against the pale walls, but in Vivian's mind the shadows sharpened. She hadn't moved from the doorway, her hand still gripping the frame nails, biting into the polished wood. The stranger Daniel Hayes sat as if he belonged, as if this room and this child had been his for years. Emma stirred her lips, sucking softly at the bottle Daniel tilted with quiet precision. Vivian's chest rose and fell too fast, each breath jagged. For months her life had been reduced to board meetings by day battles with Emma's tears by night. A cycle of exhaustion that no fortune, no staff, no prestige had managed to break. And here was a man she hadn't invited, couldn't have invited, solving in moments what she had bled herself dry trying to fix. She stepped closer, her heels sinking into the thick rug. "I didn't call anyone." Margaret had no right. Daniel didn't look up this time. His focus was wholly on Emma, who sighed with contentment, eyelids heavy, but no longer wet with tears. "Sometimes people care enough to bend rules," he murmured. "She was worried about both of you." The words struck deeper than Vivian wanted to admit. Both of you. She hadn't thought of it that way. She too was crumbling under the weight of expectation. But she folded her arms, desperate not to show weakness. "You should leave as soon as she's asleep." Daniel's eyes flickered up dark with a quiet strength. "If I lay her down too soon, she'll startle awake and scream until dawn." "You don't want that." Vivian bristled. How dare he presume? Yet against her will, she recognized the truth in his voice. Every failed night with Emma replayed in her mind, her baby gasping with cries, her own hands shaking too hard to hold the bottle right. "Why are you so calm?" she whispered, almost to herself. He shifted Emma slightly, the motion practiced natural. "Because I've lived this before. Alone. My son was 3 months old when his mother died. Nights like this." He paused, the words catching. "Nights like this nearly broke me." Vivian blinked. She had expected excuses, credentials, rehearsed professionalism. Instead, he gave her grief naked and unpolished. Her mouth was dry. "And you think you can just walk into my home and what?" Playhero Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, I'm just here to keep her safe tonight. That's all." The simple humility unnerved her more than arrogance would have. Emma's tiny hand clenched tighter around his thumb, a gesture that felt almost like betrayal. Vivian wanted to scream to rip her daughter back into her arms, but the sight of Emma's chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm stopped her. Minutes stretched. Vivian lowered herself into the armchair across from him, her anger cooling into wary curiosity. "So you're a father," she said at last, her tone brittle. "I am. Where's your child now?" Daniel's eyes shadowed. "With my late wife's parents. They helped when I couldn't stand on my feet anymore. He's older now, but I still—" His voice faded. He swallowed hard, then steadied. "I still try to be in his life." The honesty hit her harder than any polished speech. A man admitting failure. In her world, weakness was an unforgivable sin, yet in his mouth it sounded like truth. Vivian shifted uncomfortably, the fabric of her silk blouse whispering as she crossed her arms. "So you moonlight as a babysitter?" That almost smile tugged at his mouth again, dry, self-deprecating. "I work wherever I can. It keeps me close to what I know. And what I know is how hard it is to be alone in the dark with a child who won't stop crying." Silence. Only Emma's soft breaths filled the air. Vivian exhaled, the fight draining from her. She hated how much sense he made. For 7 months she had hired the best nannies with sparkling resumes, nurses with training, and none of them had managed what this weary stranger had done in an hour: bring peace. "You talk like you understand more than most," she said, her tone less combative now. Daniel looked down at Emma, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "When you've had to figure it out alone, you learn fast. Every baby cry is a language. You fail enough nights, you either give up or you adapt." His words pulled something raw inside her chest. Vivian thought of her own nights slumped on the nursery floor with mascara streaked down her face, begging Emma to drink to sleep to stop screaming. She had never said it out loud, not even to Margaret. To hear someone name the darkness she'd lived in, it was unbearable and relieving all at once. Her lips parted, then shut. A lump lodged in her throat. She wanted to tell him to go to reclaim control, to push back against the cracks forming in her armor, but Emma's peaceful sighs betrayed her. Daniel shifted again expertly, as if Emma weighed nothing. "She'll need to burp soon," he murmured. "Otherwise, she'll wake up again in 20 minutes. Vivian blinked, startled by the detail. "You even know that?" He gave a small shrug, his eyes fixed on Emma. Experience. For the first time since storming into the room, Vivian felt herself sag back into the chair. The fight had drained from her bones, leaving only exhaustion and a reluctant, unspoken gratitude. Her gaze fell to Daniel's hands, strong, calloused, steady, and for the first time she wondered not who he was, but how much he had lost to learn this tenderness. The nursery, once a battleground of sleepless nights, felt different now. Charged. Not with anger, but with something else. A recognition she couldn't yet name. And somewhere in the quiet between the hum of Daniel's voice and Emma's steady breaths, Vivian Blackwood realized this stranger wasn't leaving her life as easily as he had entered it. The city outside pulsed faintly through the nursery windows, headlights smeared against the glass like brushstrokes. Vivian sat stiff in the armchair, her posture regal, but her insides unraveling. Across from her, Daniel's presence filled the room with an ease she resented. He wasn't supposed to be here, and yet every soft breath from Emma made his intrusion feel like salvation. The lullaby he hummed tapered into silence. Daniel tilted Emma against his chest, one large hand rubbing her back in a rhythm so instinctive Vivian's breath caught. A quiet burp escaped. Then Emma's body slackened in contented sleep. For 7 endless months, this moment had been elusive. Now it arrived in the arms of a man Vivian hadn't authorized through her steel-lined gates. "You make it look easy," she said finally, her voice brittle. Daniel's gaze lifted, calm but shadowed. "It's not easy. It's just practice. And pain." His words made her throat tighten. "I don't like people in my house without my say-so." "I don't like crying babies being left in misery," Daniel countered, steady, his tone carrying no malice. "We can both be unhappy about it, but the difference is she's sleeping now." The retort landed harder than she expected. Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line, her chest aching with the sting of truth. Emma's tiny body rose and fell in serene rhythm, oblivious to the storm between adults. "Don't presume to know how I raise my daughter." Vivian's words came sharper than intended. Daniel's hand stilled on Emma's back. His eyes didn't flinch. "I'm not presuming. I'm remembering. I know what it's like to feel like everything depends on you and to feel like you're failing." The sentence hit her square. For a beat too long, she forgot how to breathe. Her life built on calculated dominance, billions, and assets. A company that bent under her command was reduced in these four walls to sleepless nights and whispered fears. "You don't know me." "No," Daniel admitted, "but I recognize exhaustion when I see it, and fear, and love that burns you alive because you can't ever put it down." Vivian's eyes blurred. She blinked hard, furious at the sting of moisture threatening to escape. She had built armor brick by brick for boardrooms, for investors, for press cameras. And now this stranger in less than an hour had cut through to marrow. "Do you think pity helps me?" she asked coldly. Daniel shook his head. "Not pity. Understanding." The word coiled in the air, heavy, disarming. Vivian dropped her gaze to her manicured nails, hiding the tremor in her hands. Minutes stretched. The city hummed. Emma breathed softly, deeply against Daniel's chest. Finally, Vivian pushed to her feet. Her silk blouse rustled her diamond earrings, catching the nightlight's glow. She walked to the crib, her arms folded across her chest like armor. "Put her down." Daniel looked at her, unyielding. "Not yet. She'll wake if I do." Her jaw clenched. "You defy me in my own house." "No," he said simply. "I protect her in yours." The audacity left her momentarily speechless. She wanted to scream to summon security to end this insult. But Emma stirred only faintly at Daniel's shifting, then nestled deeper, undisturbed. The evidence glared at Vivian more than words ever could. "Why are you even here?" she demanded. "This, whatever you're doing, it's not normal. No man does this." Daniel's mouth curved not into humor but into something sadder. "Unusual, maybe, but not impossible. I didn't have the luxury of panic when my son was born. Panic gets you nowhere when you're all they've got." Vivian blinked, caught off guard again. "So what? Because you survived your own nightmare, you think you're qualified to step into mine?" He adjusted Emma slightly. His movements so fluid they silenced her protest. "No, because I survived mine. I can sit here and tell you you're not alone in yours, whether you want me here or not." The declaration cracked through her defenses more than she wanted to admit. Her throat burned again and she turned toward the window, masking her face in shadow. "I don't need anyone," she muttered. Daniel's reply was soft but piercing. "No one does until the night they finally admit they do." Her breath hitched. For a fraction of a moment, Vivian felt weight lift, as if someone had quietly shifted the burden she'd carried too long. She hated it. She wanted it. She didn't know which more. "You should go when she's asleep," Vivian said again, but the words rang hollow. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he began to hum again, low, steady, a sound that seemed to stitch the cracks in the silence. Emma remained wrapped in his arms, untroubled. Vivian stayed by the window, staring out at the glittering skyline. But her mind wasn't on the city. It was on the stranger whose presence defied every rule she lived by, and whose arms her daughter trusted more than anyone else's. And deep inside, where she never let anyone see a dangerous thought unfurled, what if Emma was right to trust him for a long beat after her last words? The only sound in the room was the soft, tidal hush of Emma's breathing. Vivian stayed near the window, back straight, hands locked around her elbows, like she could hold herself together with nothing but posture. The city's glow painted a silver line along her cheekbone. It made her look made of glass. Daniel shifted a little, testing Emma's weight. "She's in deep sleep," he murmured. "If I transfer her now, it might hold." The word transfer scraped at Vivian's nerves, too clinical for what felt like ritual. Still she nodded. "Do it." He rose in one calm motion, keeping Emma tight to his chest. He didn't make a show of knowing. He simply knew. One hand cupped the back of her head. He lowered her to the crib's mattress like a tide laying down a shell. Then this surprised Vivian. He didn't remove his hand. He left his warm palm gently on Emma's chest for a full, slow minute, letting the rhythm of his touch match the rhythm of her breath. Emma's mouth made a tiny, searching suck. Her fingers opened, closed, opened again, and stilled. "She'll startle if you pull away too fast," he whispered without looking up. "I give it a count of 30 after I think she's settled, then another 30 after I know it." He waited. 30. Another 30. The room seemed to breathe with them. When he finally slid his hand back, he did it like a magician, so gradual that Vivian felt the air return before she believed he'd moved at all. Emma didn't stir. The nightlight haloed her lashes. Her chest rose and fell as if the sea were inside her. Vivian let out a sound she hadn't intended, something between a sigh and a sob strangled before it formed. She pressed her knuckles to her lips and blinked hard until the city blurred. A stupid thing to cry over a baby sleeping. Except it wasn't stupid. It was the one thing she couldn't buy and couldn't will into existence, and now it was here, carried into this room by a man in a frayed sweater. Daniel stepped back from the crib, giving the silence the respect of a cathedral. "Do you have a white noise option on the monitor?" he asked, voice nearly inaudible. She nodded toward the dresser. "Second button." He pressed it. A soft hush filled the room like distant rain. Emma's body relaxed a fraction more, as if agreeing. They stood there side by side, not touching, watching the small miracle they'd protected. Vivian felt the room expand. The air no longer pressed on her chest. It lifted the way it does after a storm passes and the first star appears. "Thank you," she said, and the words came out unarmored, soft enough that she barely recognized them as hers. Daniel gave a slight nod, the kind that accepts gratitude without pocketing it. He turned toward the door with the careful steps of someone who understood that victory could still be lost with a careless heel. In the hallway, the penthouse seemed too bright, the art on the walls too glossy, like a staged life she'd forgotten to keep pretending belonged to her. Vivian reached past him and dimmed the sconces. The light settled into something human. "Tea?" she asked, surprising herself again. It felt absurdly intimate to offer. She hadn't made tea for anyone in her home in months. A glass of wine with a board chair. Sure, a curated tasting for a potential partner. Of course. Tea at midnight for a stranger who had just wrung the crying out of her child. She could not remember the last time she'd chosen gentleness over performance. "If it won't wake her," he said. "It won't." She glanced toward the nursery door. "Not tonight." In the kitchen, she reached for the copper kettle and felt the muscle memory kick in, fill set flame. She set 2 mugs onto the counter and realized with a jolt that her hands weren't shaking. Daniel stood just inside the threshold, as if the room had borders she could see, and he refused to cross until invited. His eyes moved cataloging without prying the baby spoons drying by the sink, the tiny sock abandoned near a stool rung, the neat stack of unopened mail, where courier envelopes sat like unanswered questions. "You came through security," she said, the line of inquiry reappearing like a reflex. "How your housekeeper met me downstairs," he answered. She had the concierge validate the agency's confirmation and signed me in. Her mouth tightened. "Agency confirms nothing without me." He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. "She looked scared," he said. "Tired." "So did you." The kettle began to whisper. Vivian busied herself with chamomile and a slice of lemon, absurdly formal, as if the right tea would keep everything from unspooling. "You understand you violated a boundary that exists for a reason." "I understand a baby was in distress," he said. "I chose the reason." Steam curled between them. The scent of flowers and citrus softened the edges of the room. She slid a mug toward him. He didn't reach for it at first. He waited until she took hers, then wrapped his hands around the heat, like a man grateful for small, ordinary gifts. "What's her favorite time of day?" he asked, not to change the subject, but as if curiosity could be an offering. Vivian blinked. "Late morning," she said slowly. "If she's slept." The sun comes through the east windows. She watches dust float like confetti, looks pleased with herself when she grabs it, and it disappears. He smiled, the kind that lit nothing but warmed everything. "That's a good hour for songs. For babies who want the world to hold still while they learn it. Songs." Vivian huffed a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "I used to sing in the elevator on the way up, hoping she'd, I don't know, recognize me. Recognize home." "She does," he said, gentle. even when she cries. Crying isn't a vote of no confidence, it's a language. Vivian stared into her mug until the lemon slice fuzzed into yellow light. In my world, crying gets managed, problems get solved, noise gets contained. If I leave a boardroom with loose ends, investors smell blood. It's like swimming with sharks and pretending the water isn't red. She glanced up, startled by her own candor. I don't talk like this. You're allowed to, he said simply. Her laugh came out crooked. Because you're a stranger. Because I've been where nights get longer than they should. He lifted his mug and hailed. Because sometimes it's easier to tell the truth when no one is writing it down. She leaned an elbow on the matte quartz and studied him. Up close, the wear in his sweater wasn't just fabric. It was a story pulls near the cuffs, a mend at the shoulder done by hand. His hands were nicked with old work, not office work. He looked like he had lifted heavy things without complaint and learned how to put fragile things down without breaking them. What do you do, she asked, when you're not saving other people's nights? His mouth tilted, rue and humor sharing space. Odd hours. Shift work. Some security. Some driving some. He stopped himself with a tiny shake of the head, a private line he wouldn't cross. Enough to keep a roof. Keep the lights. Enough to be available when someone calls at 10 and says a baby can't breathe between sobs. The omission pricked at her curiosity, but she let it lie. His restraint didn't feel like secrecy. It felt like respect. As if his story wasn't a card to play, but a weight to carry without asking someone else to hold it. What's his name? She asked quietly. Daniel took a second before answering, like he rolled the word in his mouth to taste it first. Connor. The name made space in the kitchen, a small chair pulled up to their table. How old? 8. He rubbed his thumb along the mug's rim. He learned to ride his bike on a Saturday I wasn't there. He said it like a confession, not to be forgiven, but to be known. I watched the video later. He wobbled, corrected, kept going, like kids do. What did you do? She asked. I cried in my car, he said, bare as bone. Then I called him and asked him to tell me how it felt. He said, like the wind finally said yes. The smile that followed didn't quite reach his eyes. Kids have a way of saving their parents without trying. Vivian's throat tightened. Like the wind finally said yes. She thought of Emma sleeping 2 rooms away, thought of the months the wind had said no to everything she asked it to carry. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Not with excellence, not the way I do everything else. You already are, he said. You haven't quit. That's excellence when there's no applause. She looked away because looking at him made the truth land too cleanly. I hired experts. They all failed. They didn't fail, he said. They weren't you. Sometimes the answer is consistency, not credentials. He gestured toward the dark hallway. She knows your smell, your step, the way you whisper hello. We can build around that. We. The word caught. She set her mug down with care. There is no we, Mr. Hayes. Daniel, he corrected gently. Daniel, she echoed, and the name felt like a stone tossed into still water rings moving outward. You came tonight because someone let you in without my permission. That will not happen again. He nodded acceptance without argument. Understood, but she added against all her own rules. If you write down what you did, timing bottle temperature, the hand on her chest thing, she made a clumsy motion suddenly shy of terms. I would appreciate it. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a small spiral notebook, and flipped to a clean page. His handwriting was neat, measured. He wrote Emma at the top like a vow. Then he listed what seemed like ritual warm bottle to just below body temp. Hold vertical, pause at 3 minutes for burp, transfer after first limb drop, hand on chest 90 seconds, white noise low. He added a final line. If you feel your breath speeding up, sit first, then pick her up. She'll match you. He tore the page, slid it across the counter. Vivian took it and stared so hard the letters doubled. She folded the paper once, then again smaller than it needed to be, as if the size made it easier to hide and keep. Thank you, she said, steady this time. You're welcome. From down the hall, the white noise purred on a gentle hush. The kettle clicked as the metal cooled. Up here, the city surrendered to deeper night. Traffic thinned to the occasional whisper. Ian listened for the familiar dread to return the sense that any second would bring the next failure. It didn't. The quiet held. "You should go," she said at last. Not because she wanted him gone, but because the shape of the night depended on ending before it got named. He nodded. At the door, he hesitated. "Do you want me to text Margaret when I'm off shift? So she knows the method we used." Vivian considered balancing pride and relief on a scale she could never fully see. "Leave your number with the concierge," she said finally. "For documentation. I'll decide what to do with it." "Understood." He stepped into the foyer. She followed because it felt wrong to let him walk the glowing corridor alone, like dismissing a ghost that had done her a kindness. At the threshold he paused again, hands in his pockets, a posture that looked like a man reminding himself not to reach for anything that wasn't his. "You did well tonight," he said. "Even when you thought you weren't." She almost laughed because how could he know? But the words lodged in a place she kept empty for emergencies and fit there. The elevator chimed softly. He gave a small nod and turned away. She watched his shoulders recede, the doors close, her own reflection slide back into place on the polished metal woman of means of marble and glass and leverage. Behind that reflection down the hall, a baby slept. Vivian went back to the nursery on quiet feet. She stood over the crib and read the shape of her daughter's rest the way sailors read weather eyelashes, unmoving breath, even fingers uncurled. She laid her palm on the railing and felt the wood cool under her skin. "You're safe," she whispered, surprising herself with how the words steadied her more than Emma. "We're safe." On the kitchen counter, the torn page waited under the lemon-scented mug. She tucked it into the silverware drawer, ridiculous and perfect, as if it belonged among useful things. Before she turned off the lights, she pulled her phone from her pocket and typed a brief message to Margaret. "We'll talk in the morning." Her thumb hovered over the screen. She added, "Thank you." Then after a long breath, "Please leave the agency number with the concierge." She didn't send anything more, not authorization and not refusal, just a narrow bridge over a river she wasn't ready to name. When she finally slipped into bed, silence held. The ceiling's faint shadow line looked less like a crack and more like a seam. Vivian lay there with her hands folded under her cheek, and for the first time in months she didn't count minutes by cries or by failures. She counted them by breaths. In the last flicker before sleep took her, she saw Daniel again in the nursery's amber light. His hand steady on Emma's chest, counting to 30, then another 30, as if time itself could be taught to be kind. Days would come quickly now, she knew. Days had a way of doing that when something shifted on its axis. She didn't know which direction they'd swing. She only knew that when the elevator chimed again, morning or some later afternoon, she would feel the echo under her ribs and not mistake it for fear. She closed her eyes and let the night hold. And somewhere in a lobby, 2 floors below, a concierge slid a business card into a small envelope scrawled "For Ms. Blackwood" across the front and placed it under a brass paperweight shaped like a sailboat waiting for wind. Morning bled slowly into the penthouse, pouring pale gold across Vivian's bedroom ceiling. She stirred at the sound of muffled giggles echoing faintly from the nursery. For a breathless second, panic gripped her. Emma never giggled in the morning, not after the night she knew, but the sound repeated soft and certain, and she realized it wasn't a dream. Vivian pushed back the linen sheets, her bare feet cool against the hardwood, as she padded toward the source. The nursery door was ajar. She stopped at the threshold. Daniel was there again. Not in the rocking chair this time, but crouched low on the playmat, holding a rattle just out of Emma's reach. He teased it back and forth, his deep voice narrating in mock seriousness. "Almost got it, little one. Come on." "Oh, so close." Emma squealed, the sound bubbling out of her like it had been waiting her whole life for release. Vivian gripped the doorframe. 1,000 instincts collided inside her fury that he'd returned without her invitation. Relief that Emma looked so alive in his care dread at how quickly this stranger was dismantling her carefully drawn lines. "You're back," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. Daniel glanced up. No guilt, no flinch, only a quiet acknowledgement in his eyes. "Margaret asked me to return for the morning shift. She said you had an early call with your board." Vivian bristled. "Margaret seems to be making a habit of running my life for me." "She's running concern." Daniel countered, evenly rising, with the rattle still in his hand. Emma reached for him, and he obliged, placing the toy in her grasp with exaggerated reverence. "And Emma doesn't seem to mind." The betrayal seared. Emma, her own daughter, clung to him without hesitation. Vivian wrapped her silk robe tighter armor against the rising tide in her chest. "You don't get to decide what she minds. Or what I do." Daniel studied her for a long moment, then set the rattle down beside Emma and straightened to his full height. "I'm not here to replace you," he said simply. "I'm here because someone saw two people drowning and threw out a rope." The image caught her off guard. Vivian looked at her daughter. Cheeks flushed, eyes, bright arms, waving at the rattle. She was happy. Something that had been absent for so long it felt foreign in the room. Vivian crossed her arms. "And what happens when I don't need the rope anymore?" "Then you let go," Daniel said without hesitation. "And you'll know you were strong enough to survive. But until then, no one faults you for holding on." She hated that his words didn't sound like intrusion. They sounded like truth. Vivian stalked to the crib, scooping Emma up into her arms. The baby protested with a soft whimper, as if she'd been pulled from her favorite game. Vivian kissed her daughter's forehead, desperate to reclaim something that already felt fragile. "Your world isn't mine, Daniel Hayes," she said. "You don't know the pressures I live under. Every headline, every whisper, everything depends on me never faltering." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "And I also know babies don't care about headlines. They care about heartbeat and breath and whether the arms holding them are steady." His words slid under her defenses before she could block them. She hated how much he was right. Emma squirmed, tugging at Vivian's hair until she loosened her hold. With a gurgle of determination, she reached again for Daniel. The gesture cut Vivian deeper than she expected. She hesitated, then reluctantly let him take the child back into his arms. Daniel lifted Emma high, earning a squeal of delight that echoed against the nursery walls. "See?" he murmured to Vivian. "She already knows joy when she feels it. You gave her life. I'm just helping her laugh." Vivian turned away, swallowing hard. Her phone buzzed from the dresser, 3 missed calls from the board chair. Work clawing at her door, even here in her most private space. She silenced it suddenly, unwilling to let that world intrude on this fragile moment. When she turned back, Daniel was swaying with Emma in his arms, her cheek pressed to his shoulder, her rattle clutched like a trophy. He didn't look like staff. He looked like family. The realization unsettled her more than his midnight arrival had, because storms she could fight, threats she could banish, but the quiet possibility of needing someone that terrified her in ways no enemy ever had. And yet, as she watched Emma's lashes flutter with drowsy contentment, Vivian felt the smallest whisper of relief seep into her bones. For the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. Morning came quietly, as if afraid to touch the windows. Sun pooled along the marble island, and steam rose in ghostly ribbons from the kettle. Vivian stood in a slate robe by the window, the city a watercolor below. At the stove, Daniel moved with a practiced economy bottle, warming in a bowl, a tiny saucepan coaxing oatmeal, soft, a pinch of cinnamon rolled between fingers as if memory had scent. Emma, upright in her high chair with a bib that declared, "I'm someone's sunrise," drummed both palms on the tray. The sound light, insistent, unlatched something in Vivian's chest she hadn't known was locked. 2 ounces first, Daniel said, checking the bottle against his wrist. Then cereal. If we rush her, she'll protest on principle. On principle. Vivian echoed some of the iron in her voice, smoothed by sleep. Babies have them, he said. Tiny philosophers. They want to be heard before they agree to be fed. He didn't claim authority. He shared it like a map spread open between them. The first ounce went down with soft, approving sounds. Between sips, he glanced at Emma's face, as if to make sure the world still matched. He burped her with slow circles until a small, victorious sound escaped, and only then reached for the spoon. Vivian pressed the French press, the bloom of coffee unfurling. She poured 2 mugs before she could overthink the intimacy of it, and slid one his way. His fingers brushed porcelain. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome." He topped the oatmeal with a touch of warm milk and presented the spoon. Emma made a moral face, then reconsidered, then lunged for a second bite. Vivian's mouth betrayed her with a curve that nearly qualified as a laugh. You've done this 1,000 times, she said. Enough to recognize the patterns. He dabbed Emma's chin. And to know when the rules are wrong for the day. On the island between them sat the impossible paradox, the most complicated problem of Vivian's life solved by the calm repetition of small human things. A spoon, a circle of the hand, a voice that didn't rise when the baby hesitated. Your board is at 8, he added, not looking at her phone when it buzzed. Margaret said she blocked 15 minutes before in case you wanted to be the rope. The rope, she said, surprised the word softened rather than irritated. You used it last night. It kept me from drowning, he answered. You tie it to the strong place and let it hold while you work. He lifted Emma from the high chair. Window walk. Light helps her decide she can sleep. Vivian followed as he paced the wall of glass. The sound was hammered steel. Fairies moved like slow punctuation. Daniel didn't sing words, only a low thread of safety. By the time they reached the corner, Emma's lashes lay like quiet commas on her cheeks. He lowered her into the bassinet, left his palm on her chest, 30, another 30, and stepped back only when her breath found its tide. They returned to the island. Steam curled from their mugs. Last night, Vivian said without preface, you said you'd been alone with a crying baby and knew if you failed him your heart would shatter. The admission she hadn't allowed even to herself slipped into the light. Why this work? Not the agency version. Yours. He took time with the answer, letting silence be part of it, because there were nights when my son's crying made the walls lean in. I thought if I closed my eyes, the world would end. At 3 a.m., help comes with price tags or judgment. What I needed was time from someone who knew what to do and didn't treat me like a test I'd failed. He looked at his hands. So I give people what I needed, a few hours, a way through. What's the currency, she asked, surprised by her own softness. Time, he said, and what my hands remember. She studied the scar near his knuckle, the mend at the shoulder of his sweater, the way he took up space without demanding it. Before this security, he said, before that police. I left when every call felt like my own house on fire. Turns out I'm better at small rooms where the emergency isn't disguised. You make rooms feel safe, she said, and only realized she'd said it when he looked up. That's the job, but it doesn't work unless someone opens the door. Her phone lit board call in clean white letters. She turned it face down. He didn't remark on it. The restraint felt like a blanket she hadn't known she wanted. I built a life, so outcomes obeyed, she said. Then Emma arrived and didn't read the memo. You can't command the tide, he said. You can learn when to launch. It should have sounded like a cliché. Instead, it sounded like the way morning smelled when the kettle clicked and the world didn't end. Formalities, she said, catching herself. Background, NDA, a rate. Of course, he said. The agency has my files. You'll have them by noon. And your rate? He named a number. Vivian frowned. Too low. It's standard. It's low for this standard, she countered. And for my gratitude. His mouth tilted, but he didn't argue. We can revisit after a week, if you still want me here. The little conditional hit harder than it should have. She wanted to stamp certainty into the air contract's signatures, the crisp click of control. Instead, she said, after a week, we adjust. Both sides. Emma rustled and settled the bassinet, whispering like a shoreline. They both looked over, then back connected by a line neither of them tugged. I'll walk her when she wakes, Daniel said. The fountain buys you 90 minutes. 2 hours if she presides over the pigeons. Presides? She's already a chairwoman, he said. They'll take the minutes. It pulled a quiet laugh from her so rare it startled them both. Would you build me a routine, she asked, surprising herself. Time's cues. Not a manifesto, a rope. He took a small spiral from his pocket, wrote with neat, patient letters. 2 OS bottle pause oatmeal, window loop nap, white noise low. He added kiss before call, like a line item that belonged among ounces and minutes. He tore the page and slid it to the fridge magnet where nanny schedules had become a graveyard of good intentions. Don't make a shrine to failure, he said when he noticed her glance. Make a map to what worked. The simplicity landed like mercy. She didn't thank him. The room was already full of it. He rinsed the bowl and spoon, wiped the counter the way he had held the baby, careful, exact, without fanfare. It wasn't service. It was stewardship. She wondered how many rooms he'd left better than he found them. She wondered how many people had noticed. "Will you teach me the hand on chest again?" she asked, almost embarrassed by how much she wanted to memorize the feel of it. "As many times as you ask," he said. He shrugged into his coat. "I'll be in the lobby at 10. If you want me today, text yes. If not, I vanish like a bad idea." She should have said she needed approvals gates, the proper forms lined up like soldiers. Instead, she heard herself answer, "If I say yes, you'll take her to the fountain and show her how to preside." He smiled, not triumphant, not hopeful, just present. "Yes, ma'am." He stepped into the hall. "Daniel," she said, and he paused. "Yeah. Thank you for making morning end better than it began." He nodded, and the gesture felt like a seal pressed into warm wax. When he was gone, Vivian stood still, listening to the hush that had replaced panic. The fridge page fluttered slightly under the magnet in the draft from the vent. She walked to the bassinet, touched Emma's hair, then kissed her forehead, and the baby sighed like the sea turning. Vivian picked up her phone, opened her messages, and typed one word. She looked at it for a breath the way a diver looks at the surface before going under, then hit send. Yes. The word yes still glowed on her phone screen when the elevator doors parted in the lobby. Daniel looked up from a leather-bound notebook resting across his knee. He didn't rise immediately, as if he half expected her to change her mind. But when she appeared, hair drawn back in a silk tie, Emma balanced against her shoulder, he stood with the steadiness of someone who had been ready all along. "You came," he said softly. "I said yes." Vivian's tone was crisp, but her grip on Emma was gentler than it had been in weeks. The concierge slid a stroller forward, sleek carbon frame, a gift from one of Vivian's investors when Emma was born. Daniel unfolded it with the ease of a man who had assembled a dozen, with his own hands clicked the harnesses without fumbling, and took Emma as if she had always belonged there. Outside, Seattle's morning pressed crisp and damp against their cheeks. They moved past glass towers into the smaller streets that stitched neighborhoods together. Vivian walked a half step behind her heels, striking the pavement, but it was Daniel who set the pace. He angled the stroller toward the waterfront where gulls wheeled and the air smelled faintly of salt. At the fountain he stopped. Pigeons clustered heads, bobbing eyes sharp for crumbs. Daniel crouched, lifted Emma out, and set her carefully at the edge of the stone basin. Her tiny palms smacked the granite with authority. There he said half to her, half to Vivian. "The chairwoman presides." Emma squealed, delighted. A pigeon flapped close, then away. Daniel chuckled. "First order of business, redistribute the breadcrumbs fairly." He produced a small bag from his coat pocket. "Margaret said you don't let her near processed snacks, so oatmeal biscuits." Vivian blinked. "You carry oatmeal biscuits?" "Never know when you'll need to bribe birds." "Or toddlers." He broke one into crumbs, letting Emma scatter them clumsily. The pigeons bobbed closer, a council convened. Vivian watched something tighten her chest, loosening with every squeal. For once, Emma wasn't wailing or clinging. She was curious, commanding. The sight should have filled Vivian with pride. Instead, it filled her with a bittersweet ache because the person unlocking this joy wasn't her. "She's never laughed like that with me," she admitted before she could stop herself. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. "That's not true." "She laughs, just not always in the ways you expect. Sometimes the rhythm is different." Vivian folded her arms as if the wind had chilled her. "So you're an expert in reading my daughter already?" He didn't bristle. "No, I'm learning her, same as you." He tipped his head toward Emma. "Difference is I don't take it personal when the birds win first." Emma clapped, scattering more crumbs. The birds flurried, wings beating against the morning. Vivian found herself smiling despite herself, the sound of her daughter's giggles weaving into the city noise. They walked back slowly, Emma drowsy, in the stroller. Daniel pushed with one hand, the other resting in his pocket. He didn't fill the silence, didn't offer platitudes. He simply let the world sound itself out, footsteps, wheels, the hiss of passing buses. Vivian broke first. "You said last night you used to be police." Daniel nodded once. Why leave? His jaw tightened, but he answered. Because every call started sounding like my own house. Every siren was my son's cry. And one day I missed a detail. A small one. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to tell me I couldn't keep pretending. I had to step away before someone else paid for my ghosts. Vivian studied him, caught between admiration and something more complicated. So you traded chasing criminals for chasing pigeons. For showing up where I'm useful, he corrected. She wanted to dismiss it as sentimental, but his tone carried no pity, no performance, just fact. Back at the penthouse, Margaret greeted them, her eyes softening at the sight of Emma sleeping in the stroller. Vivian bristled, ready to scold her housekeeper for bypassing her authority again. But when Margaret whispered, "She looks so happy," Vivian's fury faltered. Daniel transferred Emma to her crib with the same ritual as the night before, hand steady on her chest. 30, another 30. Vivian stood in the doorway, arms folded, but this time she wasn't guarding territory. She was memorizing. When he emerged, she said, "Don't mistake this for permanent." Of course. His eyes held no triumph, only patience. "You decide what permanent looks like." She almost told him to leave. Instead, she heard herself say, "Stay for lunch, then go." His mouth tilted into something small but genuine. "Yes, ma'am." It was the first time in months the penthouse dining table would seat more than two. The dining table gleamed under the light of the chandelier, a vast slab of walnut that usually felt too wide for just two chairs. Today, the empty expanse between them carried less loneliness. Daniel sat opposite Vivian's sleeves rolled up posture, unhurried. Emma's high chair was pulled close to the table's edge, her fists drumming against the tray, as if announcing her own agenda. Margaret served quietly, her presence a careful shadow. She laid down a platter of roasted salmon, a bowl of quinoa, and a dish of steamed carrots diced into Emma-sized pieces. Vivian usually ate alone here, meals balanced on a tray laptop open beside a half-touched plate. Seeing the table set for three jolted her with a domesticity she hadn't felt since before Richard's decline. Daniel cut the salmon into small pieces, sliding a flake toward Emma's tray. She grabbed it in her clumsy grip and shoved it toward her mouth, squealing when it fell short. Daniel caught it midair with a napkin and replaced it without fanfare. "She likes flavor," he observed, tasting a piece himself. "Don't let anyone tell you babies need bland. They crave the world like we do." Vivian arched a brow. "And you're a culinary expert now. Survivalist, maybe." "My son refused baby food from a jar. I had to learn fast." He smiled faintly, a memory flickering behind his eyes. "Turns out garlic and mashed potatoes works miracles." Margaret chuckled, surprising Vivian. "He's right. Babies know more than we think." Vivian shot her a look that silenced further comment, but she couldn't erase the truth of it. Emma's delighted squeal as she gnawed on carrot was the most alive sound she had heard in weeks. Conversation hovered at first on practicalities, feeding schedules. Emma's naps. Daniel's willingness to adjust to Vivian's calendar, but slowly the edge softened. Vivian found herself asking questions she never would have in a boardroom. "You said last night you work odd jobs. Why not go back to the force?" Daniel's fork paused mid-air. His eyes darkened, but his voice stayed level. "Because saving strangers didn't mean anything when I couldn't save the person in my arms." The words landed heavy across the table. Vivian's appetite thinned. She saw the weight he carried, not polished into performance, but raw, scarred into the lines around his eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, surprising herself. "That wasn't fair." He shook his head. "You asked a real question. You deserved a real answer." Silence lingered, filled only by Emma's babble as she smeared carrot across her bib. Then Vivian spoke again, softer. "You talk like you've lived 10 lives. Maybe just one hard one." His mouth curved. "But Emma doesn't need to carry that. She just needs steady arms." Vivian watched him, a question blooming she didn't dare voice. Why was he here pouring that steadiness into her child? What did he gain from this arrangement other than an hourly wage that insulted the depth of what he gave? Lunch ended with Emma's satisfied sigh, her eyes drooping against the weight of sleep. Daniel lifted her gently, carried her to the nursery, and performed the ritual again. The slow transfer, the palm on her chest, the double count of 30. Vivian followed, watching from the doorway. When he stepped back, he found her eyes fixed on him. "You're good at this," she said. The admission dragged from a place she rarely touched. Daniel shrugged. "I've failed enough to learn the right way." Something in the humility unsettled her. She was accustomed to people clamoring for credit parading achievements. He offered none, only steady presence. Back in the kitchen, Margaret cleared plates. Vivian lingered by the counter, her robe now replaced by tailored silk, but her armor thinner than usual. "If you continue here," she said carefully, "I need boundaries. Written times tasks. This is not—" She gestured vaguely toward the nursery, a family arrangement. Daniel leaned against the opposite counter, his posture respectful, his tone even. "Understood. I don't mistake where I stand." The certainty in his voice rattled her more than defiance would have. She realized she wanted him to push back, to insist there was more here than convenience, that he didn't unnerve her. "You'll stay until 3, she decided. "Then leave." "I'll reassess after the week." He nodded once. "I'll be here until 3. The clock ticked in the silence that followed. Emma's faint breaths hummed through the baby monitor. Vivian poured herself water she didn't drink. Daniel rinsed a spoon with the same quiet efficiency he did everything. The room felt changed, not a battlefield, not an office, but something softer, something Vivian didn't have a word for yet. And though she had told him to leave at 3, she already knew that when the hour came, she wouldn't be ready. The penthouse shifted after dusk. Shadows stretched long across the glass, the city below dissolving into a scatter of jeweled lights. Vivian rarely noticed the transition from day to night. Usually she was tethered to her laptop, her phone, her constant carousel of meetings. But tonight silence lingered in the living room, broken only by the faint hiss of the baby monitor and the steady tick of the antique clock on the mantel. Daniel sat opposite her on the low sofa, his posture loose, a mug of chamomile steaming in his hands. Emma had gone down easier than usual, no screaming, no arching back, just a slow surrender to the rhythm of his humming. For once, Vivian didn't feel the heaviness of dread pressing her chest when the night stretched before her. She sipped her wine. "You didn't flinch once," she said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Not when she cried, not when she fought the bottle, not when I—" She stopped short. "When you, what he asked, not pushing, but coaxing. When I panicked." The admission felt dangerous in her mouth, but she let it out anyway. Daniel leaned back. "Because I've been there. More nights than I'd like to count." Vivian's brows knit. "You keep saying that, but you haven't told me what it means." His jaw worked, the faint clench of memory bracing itself. He set the mug down and rubbed his palms together slowly, like warming them against ghosts. "Connor," he said at last. "My son." He was 3 months old when his mother Sarah died. Vivian's grip on her glass tightened. The name hung in the room like a bell toll. She had complications after delivery, Daniel continued, voice low. "One day she was laughing in our kitchen, the next she was gone. Just like that. And suddenly I was alone with a baby who didn't understand why the world had broken in half." Vivian swallowed, hard heat pressing behind her eyes. She imagined herself in his place, stripped of Margaret, stripped of wealth, stripped of staff, alone with Emma in those endless nights. The thought threatened to cave her in. "I thought I could muscle through," Daniel said. "I was still on the force. Long shifts, overtime, sirens at all hours. I told myself I was strong enough to carry both loads, work and Connor. But the truth, I was drowning. Every night he screamed, I heard the echo in every call I answered. Every accident, every fight, every kid left crying in a back seat, I saw him. I carried all of it back home." Vivian didn't breathe. The room was too quiet, his voice too raw. "One night I forgot a step. Just something small. Missed a detail in a report, but it mattered. My sergeant called me out. And I realized I couldn't trust myself to hold someone else's life steady when my own was shaking apart." His throat tightened, but he forced the words. "So I stepped down. Not because I wanted to, because if I didn't, someone else would pay for my ghosts." The silence that followed pressed in like weight. Vivian set her wine glass down, fingers trembling against the stem. For once, she didn't know the script. Not CEO, not mother. Just woman facing a man who carried scars carved deep. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "Don't be. Sorry doesn't change the fact. What matters is Connor's alive. He's 8 now, healthy. With Sarah's parents most of the time, because they can give him the stability I couldn't back then." "And you see him?" she asked, tentative. "As much as I can. Soccer games, weekends. I'm rebuilding. His gaze drifted to the baby monitor. I took jobs like this because it felt closer to him, like maybe I could rewrite those nights by helping someone else survive theirs. Vivian's throat tightened. She stared at the wine swirling in her glass, her reflection fractured in the crimson. I used to think strength meant never asking for help, handling everything myself, even when I couldn't. That's not strength, Daniel said quietly. That's stubbornness wearing a crown. The words pierced. She gave a broken laugh. You've known me one day and already diagnosed me. I haven't diagnosed you, he said. I've recognized you. That's different. She looked up, met his eyes, and felt the air shift. For months she had drowned behind boardroom smiles, glossy magazine spreads, a life curated for envy. And now across the table a man in a threadbare sweater saw through all of it, not with judgment, but with understanding. Emma's faint sigh carried from the monitor, and both their heads turned instinctively. A shared reflex like parents long accustomed to guarding the same child. When their eyes met again, something electric lingered between them. Not romantic, not yet, but raw human connection. Vivian exhaled slowly. You should know. I thought you were dangerous when I first saw you in her nursery. You were right to think that Daniel said. Any stranger holding your child is dangerous, until they're not. Her lips parted, but no words came. She felt stripped down, exposed in a way she hadn't allowed in years. And yet, for the first time, she didn't hate it. They sat in silence for a long moment, the kind that didn't demand to be filled. Outside, the city buzzed on. Inside, in the glow of a baby monitor and the flicker of amber light, Vivian realized the edges of her world had shifted. This man wasn't staff. He wasn't charity. He wasn't even temporary anymore. He was the rope she hadn't known she'd grabbed, and the terrifying truth was, she wasn't ready to let go. Dawn came with a fist on the door. The sound cracked through the penthouse like a gunshot. Vivian jolted upright at the dining table where she had dozed, the baby monitor still humming beside her. Daniel was already moving, silent, shoulders squared. Emma stirred faintly in the nursery down the hall, and the second blow rattled the door frame. Vivian's stomach turned cold. She crossed to the peephole with careful steps, her robe cinched tight, her pulse hammering. Outside stood two men in dark suits, their posture sharp, their eyes practiced in intimidation, and behind them a third tall clipboard in hand, flanked by a fourth, who leaned against the wall with the stillness of private security. This is serious escalation, Daniel murmured at her shoulder. His voice carried the grit of experience. He shifted, putting himself between her and the door. The lead man's voice slid through the wood, smooth, rehearsed. Miss Blackwood, we have legal documents requiring immediate attention, asset seizure orders. Open up. Vivian's heart slammed against her ribs. Asset seizure. Her late husband's debts she had been assured were resolved, rising like corpses from graves she thought she'd buried. Daniel pressed the intercom. Those documents require proper legal service, not intimidation at 7:45 in the morning. Step back. The reply came sharp. This is your last chance. We can do this easy or we can do it hard. The threat rang heavy in the hall. Vivian felt her legs tremble. For all her billions, for all her marble floors and glass towers, she stood here like prey in her own home. Daniel's stance hardened. He moved closer to the intercom, his voice calm, measured, lethal in its steadiness. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to step away from this door and pursue this through proper channels. If you're still here in 60 seconds, I call Seattle PD. You don't have authority here. You think you can stop us, one barked. I have the authority of someone who knows what legitimate law enforcement looks like, Daniel answered. And this isn't it. The silence on the other side was sharp enough to cut. Vivian pressed her hand against her mouth, her breath unsteady. Emma whimpered faintly in the nursery, sensing tension, but not yet crying. Finally, footsteps. A murmur of heated conversation. The elevator chimed. The men retreated. But relief didn't come. Vivian sagged against the wall, her body trembling. They'll be back, she whispered. Probably Daniel agreed. He turned to her eyes, steady voice low. But next time we'll be ready. The weight of his words pressed deep. For the first time in months, Vivian realized she wasn't standing alone on the battlefield. She forced a breath past her throat. Why do you sound like you've done this before? Daniel's gaze didn't waver. because I have. The truth lingered between them like smoke heavy with the promise of more storms. The penthouse was quieter than usual after the men left, but the silence wasn't peace, it was the fragile hush after lightning. Vivian lingered near the window arms, crossed tight against her chest, her reflection ghosted in the glass. The skyline sprawled beneath her, indifferent, glittering like nothing had happened. Daniel stood by the door still and alert, as though waiting for the next knock. His frame looked carved out of stone, shoulders squared, eyes sharp. He hadn't relaxed since the men left. You knew exactly what to say, Vivian finally whispered, her voice hoarse. You knew how to make them step back. Daniel turned slightly, his expression unreadable. Because I've seen that type before. They push to see where the cracks are. If you show fear, they'll keep pressing. She scoffed bitterly. So what did I show? Because my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the robe tied. You didn't open the door, he said simply. That's strength. Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to throw his words back at him, but her voice broke instead. I didn't feel strong. I felt powerless. Daniel's eyes softened. He crossed the room slowly, as if approaching a skittish animal. Powerless would have been letting them inside. But you didn't. Vivian's arms loosened. She stared at him, the weight of her world pressing against the one steady figure who hadn't flinched. You stood in front of me, she murmured, like you'd already decided they'd have to go through you first. That's what anyone would have done. No, she said sharply, shaking her head. Not anyone. My own lawyers, my board, even people I've trusted for years. When trouble comes, they scatter. You didn't. You stayed. Daniel said nothing. He didn't need to. The truth was etched in his stance, in the quiet control that had steadied her panic. Her voice dropped lower, trembling, but steady enough to carry meaning. You're the only safe thing I've had in a long time, Daniel. The words seemed to stun even her. She hadn't planned them, hadn't meant to voice them. They slipped out raw, unpolished, but true. Daniel's jaw flexed. For a moment he looked away, as though her confession carried too much weight. Vivian. He started, then stopped, shaking his head. She pressed on. I built walls so high, even I couldn't climb out. And now you're here, not asking for anything, just holding the ground beneath me when it feels like it's crumbling. Daniel's eyes met hers, then steady and piercing. Don't put me on a pedestal, he said quietly. I'm not unshakable. I've got my cracks too. Vivian exhaled a laugh that wasn't quite laughter. Maybe that's what makes you real. Everyone else in my world hides their cracks. You don't. Emma's cry cut through the fragile quiet. Both of them turned instinctively, their shared reflex tightening the invisible thread between them. Daniel was already moving toward the nursery, but Vivian caught his wrist, stopping him. I'll go, she said. Her own voice startled her. Usually she let Margaret, or now Daniel, handle Emma's midnight unrest. But something inside her shifted tonight. She wanted Emma to feel her arms, not just others. Daniel nodded slowly, releasing the moment to her. Vivian crossed the hall, heart pounding in sync with Emma's cries. She lifted her daughter from the crib, whispering shakily, I've got you, sweetheart. Mommy's here. Emma quieted quicker than Vivian expected, little head pressing against her shoulder. Tears pricked Vivian's eyes as she rocked gently, the nursery light casting soft halos on the wall. For once, she didn't feel like a stranger to her own child. When she returned, Emma settled again. Daniel was still standing near the door, watchful, silent. His presence filled the room like armor she hadn't realized she'd needed. Their eyes met again. Something wordless passed between them. Something fragile. Something dangerous. Something she couldn't yet name. The morning after brought no peace. Vivian sat at the long dining table, her phone glowing with a list of missed calls. Attorneys, bankers, even a veiled threat disguised as a courtesy reminder from a debt recovery firm. Each notification was a stone in her stomach. Daniel lingered near the counter, pouring coffee. He watched her in silence, gauging the weight pressing on her shoulders. She finally spoke, voice low but sharp. They won't stop, Daniel. Those men last night were just the beginning. If I keep pretending this will go away, it's Emma who pays. Daniel set the mug down, his tone steady. What are you thinking? Vivian lifted her gaze. I'm thinking I need to face them. Not send another lawyer, not hide behind security. Me. His brow furrowed. Vivian, they're not playing by rules. You walk into that room, they'll smell blood. That's what they do. And what's the alternative? Keep Emma in a penthouse under siege, live in fear every time there's a knock at the door. Her hand trembled, but her voice sharpened. No, I won't let her grow up thinking her mother bought safety but never earned it. Daniel studied her. He saw more than resolve. He saw desperation hardening into courage. He rubbed his jaw. If you're going, you're not going alone. Her lips curved in a bitter half-smile. I was hoping you'd say that. By noon they were in her car, the sleek black sedan humming through the city streets. Vivian drove knuckles white on the wheel, her usual chauffeur distance stripped away. Daniel rode shotgun, his gaze scanning the sidewalks, the rear-view mirror, every alley they passed. The Marine in him had returned silent, calculating, already bracing for impact. You've done this before, she said quietly, her eyes on the road. Done what walked into rooms where you knew people wanted to break you. He didn't answer right away. Finally his voice came rough. Too many times. Her throat tightened. She wanted to ask more, but the building loomed ahead, a low, nondescript structure on the waterfront. Its glass doors shaded its windows tinted. It didn't look like an office. It looked like a trap. Daniel's hand brushed her forearm lightly. Stay behind me. Speak only when you have to. They'll try to rattle you. I'm used to people trying to rattle me, she whispered. Not like this. His eyes locked on hers. These men don't care about headlines or shareholders. They care about leverage. And if they think Emma is leverage, he let the words trail off heavy with warning. Vivian's stomach dropped, but she nodded. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and cheap cologne. A man in his 50s sat at the head of a battered conference table, his suit pressed his smile cold. The same two men from the penthouse flanked him, arms folded, eyes sharp. Ms. Blackwood, the leader said smoothly, we appreciate you coming in person. Shows responsibility. Vivian straightened her spine. I'm here to make this stop. He chuckled, leaning back. Then you know what we need. He slid a folder across the table. Your late husband left quite the mess. Interest alone is swallowing what little he had left. But lucky for you, we're reasonable men. Daniel stood at her shoulder. Arms crossed his presence, a wall of quiet threat. Vivian opened the folder. Numbers glared back at her, impossible sums that could drown even her empire if she wasn't careful. She closed it calmly, meeting the man's gaze. You're circling me like I'm prey, but you forget I didn't build what I have by being hunted. I built it by being the hunter. The man's smile faltered just slightly. Bold words, Miss Blackwood, but this isn't the boardroom. No Daniel cut in his voice, even lethal. It's a shakedown. The room stilled. Vivian let the silence stretch her pulse, thrumming. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone at a table stacked against her. Daniel's shadow stretched beside hers, anchoring her to the ground. The leader's smirk returned thinner this time. We'll be in touch. Vivian rose. Daniel followed. Neither of them spoke until they were outside the heavy doors closing behind them. Her knees nearly buckled, but Daniel's hand steadied her elbow. You held your ground, he said quietly. I felt like I was going to collapse. But you didn't. She met his eyes, breathless. You make me believe I can fight, and that terrifies me more than them. Daniel said nothing, but his grip lingered a moment longer than it needed to, silent proof that she wasn't imagining the thread binding them tighter with every step. The news broke 2 days later. Vivian's name splashed across the business networks, headlines sharp and merciless. Debt shadows Blackwood fortune. Pundits speculated, rivals salivated, and the board members who once toasted her vision now whispered about contingency plans. Vivian watched from her penthouse couch, the TV volume low. Emma asleep against her chest. Her daughter's small breaths were steady grounding, but the words scrolling across the ticker sliced through her composure. Daniel entered quietly, a grocery bag in one arm, his jacket dusted with Seattle drizzle. He caught the screen, then her pale face. They're circling, he said flatly. She shut off the TV, like vultures. He set the bag down, pulled out bread milk, a jar of baby food. The ordinary sound of groceries softened the storm for a moment. Then he looked at her straight. You knew this would happen. Vivian nodded. But I didn't know it would feel like drowning. Her voice cracked, then steadied. They're not after money, Daniel, not really. They're after me, my name, my credibility. Then you fight back on your terms. Her laugh was bitter. You make it sound simple. It isn't, he admitted. He leaned on the counter, arms folded. But panic is what they want. You panic, you sell. You panic, you cave. That's when they win. She studied him. His calm wasn't bravado, it was earned in fire. What did you do, Daniel? Before all this? He hesitated. Marine Corps. Then private security work overseas. Vivian's breath hitched. Pieces clicked together the way he scanned every room, the stance at her door, the steel in his voice that made suited bullies hesitate. That's why you're not afraid, she whispered. He shook his head slowly. I'm afraid all the time. Difference is, I don't let it make my decisions. Her throat tightened. She wanted to press further to ask about the scars she sometimes glimpsed when his shirt shifted about the nights. He sat awake long after Emma slept. But the weight in his eyes told her those stories weren't ready to be spoken. Instead, she drew a steady breath. Then I need you beside me. Not just in this apartment, at the meetings, at the press conferences. When they come for me, I need them to see I'm not standing alone. Daniel's jaw flexed. That'll make you a target. I already am, she said simply. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded once. All right, but understand this, I'm not here for headlines. I'm here for you. And for her. He nodded toward the sleeping baby. Vivian's chest ached with something she couldn't name. Gratitude, fear, the dangerous edge of trust. The next morning, flashbulbs erupted as Vivian stepped out of the car in front of Blackwood Tower. Cameras swarmed reporters, shouting questions like arrows. Miss Blackwood. Is it true your empire is collapsing? Who was the man at your apartment? Are you selling off assets to cover debts? Daniel walked at her side, broad and steady, his presence cutting a path through chaos. His hand brushed her elbow, not possessive, not showy, just there. Anchoring. Vivian lifted her chin, her voice crisp. I'm not here to answer rumors. I'm here to do business. The cameras flashed brighter. Inside the tower, her board weighted faces tight, eyes sharp. Vivian entered with Daniel behind her, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like prey walking into the den. She placed her bag on the table, met every gaze head on. You've seen the headlines. Now you'll hear from me. Blackwood Industries is not collapsing. We've survived worse storms than opportunistic debt collectors. A board member scoffed. That's easy to say, Vivian, but perception drives markets. Right now, perception says you're weak. Daniel shifted subtly behind her chair, his presence a silent rebuttal. Vivian felt it ripple through the room. She straightened her tone steel. Then we change perception. Not by hiding. Not by caving. By standing. For once, the room was quiet. Later, as the board dispersed, Daniel murmured, You did more than stand. You turned the tide. Vivian exhaled slowly. Maybe. Or maybe I just bought us another day. Daniel's eyes held hers unwavering. Sometimes another day is all you need. And in that moment, she believed him. By the end of the week, Vivian knew silence was no longer an option. Rumors multiplied faster than she could contain them, bleeding into every corner of her empire. Investors called with panic thinly veiled as concern, and employees whispered in corridors wondering if their jobs would vanish overnight. So she decided to strike first. The press conference was set for Friday morning at the Marriott downtown. The ballroom had been converted into a media den, rows of chairs, cameras perched on tripods, microphones crowding a long podium. A giant Blackwood Industries banner loomed behind the stage, its colors bold, unflinching. Vivian stood in the green room, hands trembling as she adjusted the cuffs of her navy blazer. She had faced shareholders worth billions, senators who could make or break regulations, but this felt different. Today she wasn't defending quarterly numbers. She was defending her name, her legacy, her daughter's future. Daniel waited by the door, arms crossed, his presence as steady as ever. He hadn't spoken much that morning, but his eyes stayed on her, scanning every detail like a soldier preparing for battle. You think I'm making a mistake? Vivian said without looking up. I think you're walking into fire, Daniel replied evenly, but sometimes the only way out is through. Her lips curved into a thin, humorless smile. That's the first time you've sounded like one of my motivational posters. Daniel allowed the corner of his mouth to twitch, but his gaze didn't waver. Difference is, I mean it. The room was packed when she stepped onto the stage. Flashbulbs burst instantly, a storm of light that nearly blinded her. She squared her shoulders, gripping the podium, and began. Good morning. You've heard the rumors, you've seen the headlines, but I'm here to tell you Blackwood Industries is not collapsing. Yes, there are debts tied to my late husband's ventures debts. I did not create. And yes, opportunists have tried to twist those numbers into a noose around my company's neck. She paused, letting the murmurs ripple. Daniel stood just off stage, his silhouette a constant anchor in her periphery. But I did not build this company to fold under pressure. I built it to endure, to create, to provide livelihoods for thousands of families. And I will not let shadows rewrite the truth. The applause started hesitant, then grew. For a heartbeat, hope pulsed in the room. Then a voice cut through the noise. Miss Blackwood, a reporter called, his tone sharp. Isn't it true that your husband's debts are secured against your daughter's trust fund? That if you fail to pay, Emma's future vanishes? The room gasped. Cameras swung closer. Vivian froze the words, striking like a blade. She hadn't expected them to know. That detail was buried, locked behind layers of confidentiality agreements. Yet here it was dragged into the light. Her knuckles whitened on the podium. Her first instinct was rage. Her second, fear. Emma's name in this room, her daughter's innocence twisted into a bargaining chip. Daniel shifted instantly, stepping forward just enough for her to catch his eyes. His expression was clear. Don't let them see you break. Vivian drew a breath so deep it scorched. Emma Blackwood is a child, she said firmly, her voice carrying steel. She is not a financial instrument. She is not a bargaining chip. And anyone who suggests otherwise is showing the world exactly what kind of vultures they are. Gasps rippled. Reporters scribbled, cameras zoomed. Vivian's pulse thundered, but her gaze didn't falter. The moderator quickly called for the next question, but the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. Emma was no longer invisible. She was in the storm now. Back in the car, silence pressed thick. Vivian stared out the window, her reflection pale in the glass. They're going after her now, she whispered. My baby. They'll drag her name through the mud to get to me. Daniel's voice was low, lethal. Then they'll have to go through me first. Her eyes flicked to him, raw and searching. Why are you still here, Daniel? You could walk away, pretend this isn't your fight. No one would blame you. He held her gaze unblinking. Because it is my fight now. You and Emma, you're under my watch, and I don't abandon what I protect. Vivian swallowed hard. For the first time that day, her eyes stung not with fear, but with something dangerously close to trust. The attack came faster than either of them expected. By Monday morning, Daniel's name was plastered across tabloids that had never cared about him before. Headlines screamed, "Mystery Man living with Blackwood heiress." Others dug deeper, twisting fragments of his military past into something shadowy. Ex-Marine turned mercenary. Vivian Blackwood's dangerous protector. Vivian sat at the breakfast table, the glossy paper trembling in her hand. The ink blurred as her eyes burned. They're coming after you now, she whispered. Daniel shrugged, pouring coffee as though it didn't matter. They want me out of the picture. Easier to break you without someone standing at the door. Her voice snapped sharp. Don't act like it doesn't matter, Daniel. They're painting you as some kind of criminal. He looked at her, finally steady calm. Vivian, I've been called worse in places where people meant to kill me. Ink on paper doesn't scare me. But it scared her. Not for his reputation, he didn't seem to care about that, but for what it meant. They'd found him. They'd dug into his past, his records, maybe even people he'd served with. She dragged him into her storm, and now the lightning struck him too. Emma, oblivious to the tension, babbled happily in her high chair, smearing oatmeal across her tray. Vivian reached to wipe her little hands, but her own shook so badly, Daniel stepped in gently, taking the cloth from her. I'll handle this, he murmured. Vivian's eyes flashed. No, this is my battle. They're targeting you because of me, and I won't let them bury the one person who stood beside me. For a moment their gazes locked, fire meeting fire. Then Daniel sighed, a slow exhale that softened the edges of his resolve. All right, then we handle it together. That afternoon, Vivian called a meeting in her private office at Blackwood Tower. Her PR team lawyers and 2 board members crowded around the long mahogany table. Daniel stayed near the wall, silent but watchful. Her head of PR cleared her throat nervously. The narrative is shifting, Vivian. You handled the trust fund revelation with strength, but the focus is now on him. She flicked her eyes toward Daniel. They're questioning his past, his influence, his loyalty. Vivian cut in sharply. The woman hesitated. Yes. Vivian leaned forward, her voice low and controlled. Let me make one thing clear. Daniel Hayes has stood by me in moments when the rest of you wanted to run. He is not a liability. He is my anchor, and anyone who tries to spin otherwise will answer to me. The room went quiet. Even Daniel's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite read, surprise, maybe even gratitude. A lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Still miss. Blackwood Perception is everything. We could craft a narrative, spin him as official security contracted and vetted. That would neutralize some of the suspicion. Vivian glanced at Daniel. His jaw was tight, but he gave the slightest nod. Do it, she said. But be careful. If they smell blood, they'll keep circling. After the meeting, as the others filed out, Daniel lingered by the window overlooking the gray city skyline. You didn't have to defend me like that, he said quietly. Vivian crossed the room, her heels clicking on marble. Yes, I did. He turned toward her, his expression a mixture of frustration and something deeper. Vivian, every time you tie your name to mine, you give them another weapon to use against you. She stopped inches away, her voice trembling with conviction. Then let them, because I'd rather stand with you and take the hit than stand alone and break. For a long, taut moment, neither moved. The hum of the city below filled the silence. Then Daniel dropped his gaze, shaking his head slightly. You don't know what you're risking. Maybe not, she admitted. But I know what I'd lose if you walked away. The words hung between them, heavy, dangerous. That night, the storm outside rattled the windows of her penthouse. Rain streaked down the glass, thunder rolling low. Vivian sat curled on the couch, Emma asleep upstairs, while Daniel stood near the balcony, a silent silhouette against flashes of lightning. You ever think about leaving? She asked suddenly. He didn't turn. Every day. Old habits. Scan for exits, plan the retreat. It's automatic. And yet you're still here. Daniel finally looked at her, the storm reflecting in his eyes. Because every time I think of walking out that door, I remember Emma's laugh. And the way you looked when those men showed up, like you'd been fighting alone too long. I can't walk away from that. Vivian's throat closed. For once, she didn't try to fill the silence with words. She just let it settle raw and real. And as the storm raged outside, she realized something terrifying and undeniable. She didn't just trust Daniel. She needed him. The next blow didn't come through lawyers or tabloids. It came through a leak. Vivian was in her office reviewing quarterly projections with her CFO when her phone buzzed with an urgent notification. She clicked the link and the world seemed to tilt. There it was, Daniel's military file. Or at least what looked like it. Photos redacted pages, reports suggesting he had been dishonorably discharged after a mission gone wrong. Phrases like unauthorized use of force and civilian casualties blared across the screen. Her CFO's voice faltered mid-sentence as he glanced at her phone. Is that about your security detail? Vivian snapped the device face down, pulse racing. Meeting's over. She dismissed him before her composure cracked. When Daniel arrived minutes later, called by her trembling voice, he read the leaked file without flinching. His jaw locked, his hand tightening around the edge of her desk. This is fake, he said finally, his tone cold. Sloppy forgery. Half these dates don't line up, but they don't need it to be real, do they? They just need people to believe it. Vivian rose from her chair, pacing the length of the office. They're accusing you of war crimes, Daniel. War crimes. And they've put it on every major outlet in the last hour. Investors are panicking again. The board is demanding explanations. They're going to force me to... She stopped herself, but Daniel's eyes caught the unfinished sentence. Force you to what he pressed. Her throat worked. To cut ties, to distance the company from you, to fire you in public. The silence after her words was unbearable. Daniel stared at her face, unreadable, but his silence hurt more than anger would have. Finally, he said quietly, If you have to do it, do it. Vivian's breath caught. After everything, you think I'd abandon you because of a smear campaign? Daniel's shoulders stiffened, his voice harsher now. I think I've seen people do worse to save themselves. I wouldn't blame you. Her eyes flashed. She crossed the space between them, stopping inches from his chest, trembling with fury. Don't you dare put me in the same category as the people trying to ruin us. You saved my daughter. You've shielded me more times than I can count. And you think I'd betray you for a headline? For the first time, his composure cracked. He dragged a hand down his face, exhaling sharply. Vivian, you don't understand. If you stand by me, they'll come harder. They'll drag Emma's name back into it. They'll do whatever it takes to break us both. Her voice dropped fierce and unyielding. Then let them, because I will not let them write our story for us. That night, Vivian convened her board. The room was tense, the directors shifting uneasily in their leather chairs, whispers swirling before she even entered. Daniel stayed outside a shadow in the hall, though she knew his ears caught every word. One gray-haired director spoke first. Vivian, with all due respect, the optics are catastrophic. This man is accused of atrocities. Whether true or not, association puts us in jeopardy. Vivian leaned forward, her palms flat on the polished table. You think I don't know what they're saying? You think I don't see the headlines, but I also know the man they're talking about. He's not some stranger. He's the reason I'm still standing. He's the reason Emma is safe in her bed at night. If you think I'll throw him to the wolves to save our stock price, you don't know me at all. The room froze. The power in her voice, the raw conviction, silenced even her fiercest critics. Another director cleared his throat. Miss Blackwood, surely there must be a compromise. There is no compromise, she cut in. Not on this. Either we weather this storm together, or I'll take the company private again. My fortune built it once. I can build it again without you. The weight of her words crashed into the room. Shocked faces widened eyes. She'd called their bluff, and they knew it. Later, as she stepped into the hallway, Daniel waited, his expression guarded. How bad was it? Vivian exhaled, leaning against the wall. Bad. But they know now I won't abandon you. Not ever. For a long moment, Daniel just looked at her as though searching for cracks in her resolve. When he found none, something in his stance softened. You don't know what that means to me, he said quietly. She reached out her hand, brushing his forearm, a touch that lingered longer than it should. Maybe I do. The space between them felt charged, alive, fragile. For the first time, Vivian realized this wasn't just loyalty. This was something neither of them had dared name yet, and that made them more dangerous than ever to the enemies circling outside. The shift happened when Daniel decided they'd been on the defensive too long. For weeks they'd endured the smears, the knocks on doors, the headlines meant to choke them. But Daniel's training had taught him one thing: if you never strike back, you'll eventually be cornered. And Vivian had reached the point where fear had burned itself into steel. One night, with Emma asleep upstairs and the rain slicking the city in silver, Daniel spread a series of files across Vivian's dining table. Not leaks, not forgeries, real documents. Where did you get these? She whispered, staring at the stamped seals, the names, the quiet trails of money transfers. Contacts, Daniel replied. He didn't elaborate, but his eyes were hard. I called in favors. Men I served with, people who still believe in honor. They traced the leaks, the attacks, all of it, straight back to one person. He tapped a name circled in red ink, Howard Kellerman. Vivian's blood went cold. Howard Kellerman, chairman of Kellerman Capital, her late husband's fiercest rival. A man who had tried for years to worm his way into Blackwood Industries, to buy it piece by piece until her fortune was his playground. He's behind everything Daniel said. The debt collectors, the leaks, even the forged files. He's been pulling strings to isolate you, force a collapse, then swoop in when you're too broken to fight back. Vivian's voice shook. And dragging you through the mud was just leverage. Daniel's jaw clenched. Collateral damage. For a moment, silence filled the penthouse, broken only by the hum of the storm outside. Vivian pressed her hands flat to the table, trying to steady herself. What do we do? She asked finally. Daniel met her eyes. We hit back. The next morning, Vivian strode into Blackwood Tower with Daniel at her side. Her employees turned their heads, whispers following them down the glass hallways. She ignored it all. Her mind was sharp, her heart steady. In the boardroom, she laid down Kellerman's files like weapons. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice cutting clean through the room. "We've been playing defense for weeks. But now we have proof. Every attack against this company, every lie, every smear leads back to Howard Kellerman." Gasps rippled. Some faces paled, others hardened. One director sputtered, "You can't accuse him without—" "I'm not accusing," Vivian cut in. "I'm proving. These are authenticated records of shell companies transferring funds to smear outlets, private investigators hired under false names, payments to tabloids that released the forged files on Daniel. This is no coincidence. This is an orchestrated takedown." She glanced at Daniel, standing like a sentinel against the wall. His presence alone gave weight to her words. Now she continued, her tone colder. "We can go public with this. Expose Kellerman for what he is. Or we can stay quiet, let him keep tearing us apart and watch everything we've built collapse." The decision was obvious. That night, Vivian and Daniel sat side by side in her office, drafting the statement that would change everything. She typed slowly, carefully, her words measured but sharp. "Blackwood Industries has been the victim of a coordinated smear campaign funded and orchestrated by Howard Kellerman. Evidence has been secured and verified by independent auditors. We will not be silenced. We will not be intimidated, and we will not abandon those who have stood by us." When she finished, she leaned back, her shoulders trembling. Daniel placed a hand over hers on the keyboard. "You sure about this?" he asked softly. "Once it's out there, it's war." Vivian turned her head, meeting his gaze. "It's already war. This is just the first time we're fighting back." For a long beat, their hands stayed together on the keyboard, the weight of unspoken things pressing between them. Daniel broke the silence. "No matter what happens, Vivian, I'll be here. I'm not leaving." She swallowed her throat tight. "I know." And for the first time since the storm began, she believed it. When the statement went live, the reaction was instant. Headlines flipped. News anchors debated Kellerman's name with fire in their voices. Investors rallied, furious at the revelation of corporate sabotage. And Howard Kellerman himself, once smug in his distance, was suddenly dragged into the light, his empire trembling. Vivian watched it unfold on the evening news, Emma asleep against her shoulder. Daniel stood behind her, arms crossed, silent but steady. The tide had turned. For the first time, the predators were on their heels. But Vivian knew the fight wasn't over. Men like Kellerman didn't surrender. They struck harder when cornered. And when the counterattack came, she and Daniel would have to be ready, not just as allies, but as something more. The counterattack came faster than even Daniel expected. 3 days after Vivian's statement went live, a subpoena landed on her desk. Federal investigators, allegedly tipped off by anonymous sources, demanded she testify regarding fraudulent accounting practices. Every news station screamed the story within hours, painting her as the face of corruption. Howard Kellerman had fired his last bullet, and it was aimed straight at her heart. By evening, protesters gathered outside Blackwood Tower, chanting her name with venom. Reporters swarmed the sidewalks, their microphones jabbing at the air like weapons. Upstairs in the penthouse, Vivian sat stiff-backed in her armchair, Emma sleeping against her chest, her hand trembling against the baby's hair. "They're going to destroy me," she whispered. Daniel crouched in front of her, his hands steady on her knees. "No," he said. "They're going to try, and then we're going to burn them down with the truth." Her eyes lifted to his, wet and uncertain. "What if I lose everything?" Daniel didn't flinch. "Then you'll still have Emma, and you'll still have me." The words cracked something open inside her. She'd spent years building walls shielding her heart behind empire and armor. But now, with the city baying for her blood, the only thing holding her upright was the man in front of her, the man who had walked into her life with nothing but quiet strength and a promise to protect. The next morning, she walked into federal court, Daniel at her side. Cameras flashed like lightning storms. Reporters screamed questions. "Ms. Blackwood, did you falsify records? Is your bodyguard a war criminal? Do you deny Howard Kellerman's allegations?" Vivian stopped on the courthouse steps. She turned, facing the sea of lenses, her voice carrying sharp and clear over the chaos. "Howard Kellerman has tried to bury me under lies. He forged files on my security chief, smeared my late husband's name, And now he dares accuse me of crimes I did not commit. Well, here's the truth. I will not be intimidated. I will not let a predator steal what my family built, and I will not stand alone. She reached for Daniel's hand, gripping it tight, holding it high for the world to see. This man has protected my child, my company, and my life. And I will protect his name in return. If you want to call us guilty, then call us guilty of standing together. The crowd roared. Some booed, but others cheered, their voices rising above the jeers. The image of the billionaire widow and the single dad veteran, hand in hand on the courthouse steps, blazed across every screen in America within minutes. Inside the hearing unraveled Kellerman's scheme piece by piece. Daniel's contacts, subpoenaed as witnesses, testified under oath. Independent auditors confirmed every fraudulent transfer traced back to Kellerman Capital. The forged military files were exposed as fabrications. By the time Vivian finished her testimony, the tide had turned completely. The prosecutors withdrew, and the judge ordered an immediate investigation into Kellerman. When Vivian and Daniel emerged onto the courthouse steps, the same crowd that had jeered now surged with applause. Chants of Blackwood, Blackwood rolled like thunder down the street. Vivian blinked back tears as she lifted Emma into her arms, the baby blinking wide-eyed at the noise. Daniel leaned close, his voice low enough only for her. "You did it." "No," she whispered back, her eyes meeting his. "We did it." That night the city was quieter. Vivian stood on her balcony, the skyline glittering against the dark. Daniel joined her, his sleeves rolled up, the lines of exhaustion etched across his face. For once he looked at ease, like a man who had finally laid down a burden. She turned to him. "What happens now?" He shrugged lightly. "You rebuild. Kellerman's finished. The company will heal." "That's not what I meant," she said softly. Her eyes searched his brave in their vulnerability. "What happens to us?" Daniel's throat worked. He stepped closer, his voice low and certain. "That depends on you." Her hand found his fingers threading together. "Then let's find out." In that moment, on a balcony above a city that had tried to break them, Vivian Blackwood and Daniel Hayes chose something neither headlines nor enemies could destroy each other. The story of the billionaire single mom and the single dad veteran didn't end with a scandal. It began with one. Because what the world saw as survival was in truth the start of something bigger, an alliance built on trust, on sacrifice, on love, born in the fire of adversity. And though storms would come again, they knew this, no one was taking away what they'd fought for. Not this time. Not ever. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.